Okay, good morning, Matthew. Thanks a lot for joining us. Can we start with a brief introduction about you?
Yes. Hi, my name is Matt. I am a self-taught software developer. I actually worked in restaurants the majority of my life. I cooked, I bartended, I served, and then a little over 5 years ago, when I was getting close to 30 years old, I was not happy and I needed to do something different. And I almost went to a boot camp, and I reached out to a friend of mine. I was like, hey, listen, I'm either going to go pay for this boot camp or I'm going to move home for the first time in over 10 years, back with my mother, but I want to learn how to write software very, very professionally. And he was like, forget both those options. He was like, I'll teach you. And so we had come to him with an idea at one point. Ironically enough, we paid him to build the idea for us at one point, and he couldn't finish it. And so full circle, when I came back and asked him what to do, he was like, I will teach you. He actually taught me to build the idea that we paid him to build,
Oh, wow.
which was very funny. And so he handed me Ruby on Rails and helped me build a back end. And my head swam for a long time. Ruby on Rails was a lot of magic and models and views and controllers. I was like, this is too much. You know what I mean? I'm just like entering commands. I'm getting that far, but and then he handed me React Native. And he handed me just like a little bit, like a simple sign-on page, some state management with Redux. Again, I didn't even know JavaScript, let alone React at that time, but he handed it to me. And so once I could like console log things, and once I realized everything like Ruby on Rails, I could go here, 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 here. With React, it was just one way, right? It's unidirectional data flow, so I could follow it. So once I could log everything, I took his simple little app and was actually able to reverse engineer it and just kind of go backwards and see how he started. And it was from there that like it kind of like clicked for me a little bit, that it was like less magic and it was like, oh, this makes sense now. And so it took me about a year to build that app. It was like a textable business card. And so it took me about a year to build that. It was very frustrating at times, where I literally stared at the same error for like a whole month and, almost gave up, because I was like, my buddy had gotten a little busy and so I couldn't get his help. And then, he came over and he was like, did you update your packages? And I was like, what? And so he comes and updates my packages, and the error I'd been banging my head against the wall for a month was just updating packages. React Native it's a dependency nightmare sometimes, with all the modules and the pods and everything else, but eventually got through it and I released that app into the App Store. And fortunately at the time, React and React Native weren't very big 5 years ago. I mean, not nearly as big as it is now. So finding like freelance devs who had that kind of experience was what actually got me my first job. So I went on a site like Upwork. I started just like setting my rate, and I just kept taking it a little bit lower and a little bit lower and a little bit lower until finally, someone that got enough attention. My first big contract was like a good 6 months, and it was working on this big dashboard for like a business. And so that was my first paid gig, was a freelancing gig, and then that led to my first interview at a startup, and then that led to my next role, which I was at for about 3 years. So that was like the beginning of the journey. Lots happened since then too, but that's how it started.
Wow. So you said you were working in some hospitality business before this.
Yep.
And you decided that you want to shift, and so I'm sure it must be something frustrating in the beginning. How did you cope up with that?
Oh, man. So fortunately, I had a buddy to help me through it. And the other thing is like, I was almost 30 years old, and this is going to be hard for maybe the young bucks to understand this feeling. If you're just coming out of college, you're not going to feel, well, maybe, well, I don't know, but I was getting older and I was serving tables and I didn't want to work in restaurants anymore. And I was very unhappy. I was working at a very high-end restaurant here in Chicago, and it was depressing, and I worked very hard for very little money. And, I kind of honestly partied a lot in my youth. I had a lot of fun. And so I didn't have any really thing to show for it, to be quite honest. And I was scared. I was panicked. It was existential dread. And I was like, once I sunk my teeth into this, okay, and it started to work, it was a mix of like, oh my God, I can do this. And oh my God, this is a path forward to something else. And so I became like obsessed. And so, I'll be honest, there are those moments where I said I almost couldn't get through it. I'm not sure what got me through it at the beginning. Or for 6 months in, when I waited a whole month and I kept trying the same thing, I was just, I had to be obsessed. I'm not sure I would have gotten through it otherwise. Obsessed and unhappy with my other thing. Yeah, you gotta want it, I guess. It's hard to,
You do not feel like going back.
No, not at all. No.
Okay, that was good motivation. A lot of people are really scared of moving. Like I've seen people who want to move into IT, but then they feel, should I go? Or is it a restart again?
Oh, do it.
You made it.
Start again. And and there's so many different ways to get into. You don't have to be the person writing JavaScript code or Python. Or, I mean, hell, you can be testers or product managers or even the security pen testing, like all of that. There's just so many different ways that, anyone can get into tech, I think, for the most part. So.
Right. So, like, you have been working on full stack development since then.
Yes. So, in professionally, like the majority of my jobs since then, like my full-time jobs, I've actually only been doing React work. And so that's been, because here in Chicago, React was one of the technologies a lot of people adopted, but where Chicago is actually a big Ruby on Rails city because it was kind of born out of Chicago. And so a lot of the tech scene uses that. And so, but like I dove into like AWS and serverless. And so that's finally starting to catch up around here. And then now all more remote positions, the job are becoming more available. But the full stack work I've always done has been on my freelancing gigs and in my free time. So I actually started to, the biggest project besides my first thing I built, which was technically a full stack project, but again, my buddy really helped me with all the Ruby on Rails. The next one I built was, I had an idea for mobile payment at bars and restaurants. Again, ironic, right? Because I worked in restaurants all those years. Here's my idea. Now I know how to build it. And so it was like, if you've ever walked into a bar or restaurant and, you wait forever to pay the bill, and it gets really frustrating because at the end of the night you want to go home or whatever, you're in a rush, this, that, or the other. I was like, why can't I do this from my phone? Why can't I pay the bill from my phone? And so like clicked, and I was like, okay. So I started doing research, and there were some APIs I could talk to that knew how to talk to the same restaurant software that the bartenders and servers and staff would use. So I started to build this thing out. And I kind of did it in my free time, and with a partner who actually worked with me at another startup. She was a designer. She actually was getting her master's in design, and her thesis ended up being based on this project. And so, we built it over the course of a year and a half. And when I jumped into that project, I did not know anything about GraphQL, anything about AWS other than S3. And at the time I was using Amplify. And when Amplify came out 3 or 4 years ago, it was a little while rougher around the edges, and I really didn't know what I was doing to begin with anyhow. So I'm like out here obsessed with the idea, but I don't know what I'm doing. And so I'm stitching together tutorials, right? That's all I'm doing is trying to make this thing work. And the one tutorial was following was this guy named Adrian Hall, who was actually like an AWS advocate at one point, but he had built this restaurant review app series. I was like, oh my God, this is the infrastructure I need. This is perfect. I can follow this and will help me build my idea, right? And get the core of what I need. The only problem is it's single table design. And I don't know if you know much about DynamoDB. And there's, and one of the styles of designing tables is this single table design where it's really flat structure for, how the records are, because it's NoSQL. And so, but the point is I was using Amplify in its early days, and their infrastructure was a lot more rigid. You didn't have the escape hatches that you have now. You couldn't customize it the way that you can now. You were kind of like locked in. And so I was trying to cram this single table design tutorial in my Amplify project. And this is all being built in React Native on the side. I couldn't get it to work. I couldn't figure it out. Didn't even know CloudFormation. I'm like, all of this, right? I'm just like, I don't. And so what I ended up having to do, because I couldn't get it to work with the CloudFormation resources they had generated for me without them overriding it, because back then you couldn't, again, you just couldn't. So I ended up having to take the whole thing piece by CloudFormation piece and move it into serverless templates. And again, I didn't know any of it, any CloudFormation, I'll tell you that much. I had to learn it as I was moving it over, and failed deployment after failed deployment after it was endless. I can't tell you how many failed deployments I had until it was like chipping away until finally I moved the whole infrastructure over to serverless. And then the one amazing thing about Amplify is that I could just import, essentially the resources into that AWS exports file and just swap it out completely. And so that was a lot. And I had a Stripe integration there too. And like I said, throw on GraphQL on top of it and Apollo. I don't know if you've ever used Apollo for state management. I found it extremely frustrating 3 years ago. I can't tell you how many wasted hours when I should have just used Redux at the time. But here I was using all the new stuff because I was following Nader's tutorials too, he's a big reason I even got where I'm at. So anyhow, I went the really, really hard way. And, I made the big mistake. If you're actually trying to build something, you shouldn't use a bunch of new technologies, right? But I did. And because it was so hard and then moved everything over, I learned an incredible amount of things, especially with that was the biggest accident I ever made was, if that worked out, was learning this project through the lens of Amplify, because it forced me to use all these other resources. But I had to end up diving deeper on each one of them because Amplify and then moving those things out. And I learned so much about Cognito and DynamoDB and database design in general. Elasticsearch, I can't tell you how deep I went into that one because I was like obsessed with building my idea. Like I felt like it had this potential, I was unstoppable. That didn't last after 2 years. I got burnt out eventually, but I did build the project. It went the whole way through. We actually got it into a bar and restaurant. It worked. All the money went from the customers to the bar. The bar got paid out. The system worked. I was so proud. And then I was like, now we got real work to get to. And then that was just the start. And then we kind of did some things, and then COVID happened and I ended up shutting it. But the whole point of all that is to say, I was obsessed with building something like I was the very first time around that I learned. I dove headfirst into a bunch of technologies I didn't know any better, which luckily I went off the recommendation of a buddy, like he did with me with React Native. And because I ventured into unknown territory with the combination of I need to build this, I'm excited to build this, I want to build this, it was enough to get me through and to learn the whole way through because I had this end goal in mind. It was something that I wanted to build, and not just some, like you say, hello world app. Like that doesn't, like the biggest piece of advice I can give anyone is build something that you want to build that's going to make you excited. That's when you hit those errors, you're going to be frustrated, but you're going to come back later because you want to get it done. You need to get it done,
Yeah. So again, like building such a huge project must be a time-consuming task. Like, how many days did it take, and how many hours every day?
Oh man, it's so tough. It's so funny. I think now, if I redid the project from all over, now granted, like it was slow because like I was working with a designer, and then she pivoted a couple of things, right? And then I learned a few things along the way. Not even just what could and couldn't be done, and then that changed some things. So, but like start to finish, I mean, I originally had the idea in 2017, at the end of 2017, and then I don't think we started working on it till sometime in October, and then worked on it and got it released, I think. So that was 17. It was a little about a year. It took up a little less, probably about a year and 3 months, I would say, in the free time, working on it. Plus, like I said, not only that, but I had to go like sell to the restaurants and everything else too. So it's really hard to gauge. But honestly, looking back, if I had to do it again, especially with how the way Amplify is now, I tried to rebuild my app during a hackathon. I thought I could do it in 3 weeks, but I think it could be done in a few months, honestly.
Okay.
Looking back.
The first time you made it was more than a year.
More than a year. Just like my very first app. It was more than a year. Yeah. All those new technologies. Yeah. It's a lot.
That's really interesting. Very few people can do that.
Be obsessed. That's all I got. I'm losing those obsessions. I'm hoping to. The next venture I'm trying to get into is Web3 and blockchain development. Yeah, you go check out. Have you ever heard of the graph? Go check it out.
Yeah,
it's like GraphQL for blockchain. Essentially, it's really interesting. But yeah.
So you're planning some product in there, or?
No, honestly, no. I just. It's like I started investing a little bit in crypto this year. I actually lost money, but it was really interesting, and it really gave me like this taste for it. And I don't know if you saw Nader. He stepped into the crypto space. Are you familiar with? I keep saying his name, Nader Dabit. Are you?
No.
I'm not sure. Oh, okay, so Nader was like one of the bigger AWS developers. I mean, there's been plenty of AWS like advocates out there, right? Brand ambassadors, but Nader was one of the best and one of the biggest there. And so he was there when I started AWS, and so he killed it and was putting out an immense amount of content. And he's part of the reason that I made it where I'm at today is because of the AWS content he put on the internet. He actually left AWS in last year and went into the crypto space. And he went into this company I'm talking about called The Graph, which blends like GraphQL work, because one of the biggest problems with the blockchain is, it's not very efficient for querying data, right? It's like one giant record. That's the whole point, right? It's like a ledger. It just keeps going back and back and back. It's not like a traditional database, or I can just go here and get the record where I want, right? So the whole point of what the graph does is it allows people to essentially index content, index records, and make it queryable and build GraphQL requests around it. So I could come in here and be like, there's this blockchain over here, right, that's very popular, and people want to know, how many people bought this and how many, I don't know, how many addresses there are and how many tokens there are and how many got burnt, all this stuff. And so they allow me to index that content off the blockchain, host it up in their graph, and then if people use essentially my endpoint, right, that I built, I would get paid. Okay, and then other people can essentially say, hey, listen, I think this is going to do very well. I'm gonna curate them, and you essentially stake your money or your coins because you're signaling that this is going to be strong and people are going to use this, and I want to be a part of it too. So there's essentially this opportunity to build GraphQL API within the larger ecosystem of their GraphQL API. You're like a subgraph, that's what they call them. But you could build a subgraph and make money just from knowing what people want to query on the blockchain. And to me, that's wild. Yeah,
that's wonderful.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. It's interesting for sure. So yeah.
So how does it feel? 6 years back, you knew nothing about JavaScript. Now you're venturing into blockchain. It's a big journey.
Sometimes I can't believe it. The blockchain thing probably won't happen for a minute. Right now, I'm taking up as much freelancing work as I can get. Because believe it or not, I said like I've been doing the AWS thing the last couple of years, but like I'm still at a job where day to day I only touch React stuff. I don't even do back end there. So I'm trying to slowly move into a more serverless full stack position, full time versus just in my spare time, and then move into that. But yeah, I don't know. I'd tell anyone at any age to get in if they could, because it's been a wild 6 years, and the freedom is something that I was not used to. And if anyone who's ever worked in restaurants or bars or anything like the sort, not only are you time constrained to 8 hours and you're on your feet and all that stuff, but the real freedom is, if you've ever worked at a job where you had to ask off for permission, you had to ask for permission to have off work, right?
Mm-hmm.
Which some people will get that and some people won't. But I'll never forget the first time I didn't ask off work. I said, hey, listen, I won't be available on Friday. I just sent an email. I thought I was getting away with something. I felt like I was getting away with something. I was like, hey, team, I'm not going to be at work at Friday. I have something, blah, 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 blah. They're like, yeah, no problem. I was like, holy crap, that worked. They didn't say anything. I didn't get any flack. Nobody told me no. I was like, oh my goodness, what a dream this is. And I get to sit here and use my brain all day. Woo! Yeah. So it's the freedom is one of the cool things. Like, don't get me wrong, I love coding. I don't think I'll write code probably more than the next 5-ish years, I'd say, like heavy like I do now. I think that'll fade. And, I don't know, as we get older, if people hire 45-year-old coders anymore. I think you almost have to move into management or something else. I don't know, but I'm enjoying it while I can. So.
Okay. So another question that many people have kind of, um, they don't want to get into freelancing because they are not sure if they will get something. And people feel it is safe to be on a job.
Yeah. Well, so freelancing was the only way I got my first job. I was actually still at the time like serving tables, looking for work, which is kind of like the first hurdle is always the biggest, getting in. That took me the longest time. And but freelancing now is different. I still wouldn't go full time unless maybe get a job is what I'd say. Get a job, and then it's not fun, but work your job and work another half a job, right? And get enough credibility, and then build up your portfolio, and then one day maybe you got some money saved up, or maybe you have enough of a half client that you can like take the leap. But to say, I'm a freelance developer now and I only take freelance work is hard, because you have to be able to afford that. So if you can't afford that, which a lot of us can, and I, still can't, because I'm still working my full-time job and still doing, on the side. But yeah, get a job, and then do the stuff on the side until you feel comfortable enough to jump out there. Unless you have the financial means and you can kind of like afford to sit around and wait. But if you're new and you're young, it's going to be hard to get freelance work. I'm not going to lie. You might be able to go to those freelancing websites, or you'll get work and you'll be able to charge significantly less than other people, and all that's fine and dandy. But you don't want that. You want those freelancing rates, right? That's the whole point. You want to get paid well and you want to work slightly less. So, earn that credibility, and then I think you'll find that it'll be a lot less stressful and difficult to find. So.
Okay, so you continue to get from Upwork or some sites, or now it is out of your contact?
I did last year, yeah. And so, Amplify was just starting to gain some popularity outside of like, the little dev world. Like, actual people were using it that weren't just us. And last year, I actually pulled 3 different clients off of Upwork for AWS Amplify. And like I said, the first time I got the job with Upwork, it was React. And so like, it's hard for me to say like it's just that easy, because I got lucky, because at the time, not many people were using React. So I was one of the few React developers. Now, there wasn't a lot of people looking for React on there either, but I was one of the few ones that they could hire. It was the same thing with Amplify on Upwork. Not many people were looking for it, but the ones who were, I was one of their only options, right? And so, I don't mean only, but it was just few and far between. So I'm not saying like go learn a new technology, but it gets harder and harder as a technology becomes saturated. You're competing with more people. Somebody can do it for cheaper, maybe better. So yes, Upwork, maybe go set your price. Like I said, worked for me where I kept setting it lower, but I think the best bet is to have a portfolio and go on Twitter, build things on Twitter. Oh my goodness. Forget Upwork, forget anything else. I've seen so many people bring their positive energy and their hard work to Twitter and talk about it and write about what they're building. And I see what it does for them over the years. It's incredible. I've seen so many people get so many opportunities just over 1 year's worth of time of building relationships with dev people on Twitter and tweeting about what they're doing and blogging about what they're doing and just building something that either you knew you needed, that other people wanted, or just other things that are like maybe exciting right now. But if I were to do it over again, I would be on Twitter. I'd be making friends. I'd be chatting people up. I'd be adding to conversations or just learning and watching and then, writing about it, because I've just never seen such a powerful social media tool for getting you jobs. It's unbelievable. Everybody get on Twitter. Go right now. Do it.
Wow, that's nice.
Yeah, that's actually how I got into the AWS Community Builders, was Twitter.
Oh,
I don't know, the old developer was like, hey, I have this slot open for the AWS Community Builders. He's like, if you've done any, talking on blah, 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 blah. And I was like, oh, I did a talk and had some content. And boom, ended up in the AWS Community Builders because of one tweet.
Oh.
Yeah, so.
You've been talking about Amplify. Like, I tried to learn Amplify several times.
Yeah.
I failed miserably. Every time I realize that it's much easier to go down there and make the framework for yourself, make the infrastructure yourself instead of going through that Amplify.
It all depends on the type of project you're doing, honestly. And it does have its little quirks, but they've made it to a point where you can customize almost any of it now. So like what I think Amplify is really good is for handling it's really not good for like back-end intensive processes. Like that's your whole business, is like business back-end logic. All you have is a bunch of, I don't know, step functions or maybe a whole orchestration of lambdas and SQS and all that. That's maybe not so great for Amplify right now, at least. But what it really is great for is those core services of a database, authentication, and then your GraphQL API, and then hooking up lambdas to that. So for like any client side or consumer facing apps that have APIs, I think it's fantastic for, and it covers a lot of use cases. And so I would love to hear, maybe, I don't know if that's the time for this conversation, to hear why you struggled with it, or maybe what you were trying to build that you found it frustrating, and maybe how long ago it was that you were trying it to, because it depends where in the timeline of Amplify that you tried that it was easier or difficult, to be honest. So, but yeah.
I tried it 1 year back, 6 months back, in last week as well. But every time I started it, I struggled with it for 4 or 5 hours. I said, forget it, I'll just go and make my framework, my infrastructure myself.
What were you trying to build?
I was trying to, entire infrastructure was not possible on Amplify. So I thought I'll make something in Amplify just to learn it, and then rest of it I'll make it myself. I wanted to use event bridges and a lot of SQS and some custom structure in DynamoDB, and I just was not able to make it.
Yeah. At a certain point, you'd almost have to just drop your own cloud formation templates inside like a custom resource. Now you're getting into the advanced stuff where you essentially add your own resource in, and then you have to go to the top of the file down to the plugins, and you're like, what the hell is going on here? Yeah, anything that falls outside of ecosystem is a little rough. But if all you're starting out with is a database incognito, right, and Elasticsearch and the GraphQL API, oh my goodness, it can get you really, really, really far. Yeah.
I'm going to try it once again.
Yeah, I've really thought about this long and hard, because I was working with somebody who's a traditional, he builds everything in serverless. And so I'm like, man, it's like, to me, there's a lot of benefits of using Amplify if you know what and how you're using it. And I'm like, I would hate to have to give that up, because, I have other processes that exist that I would need to build in like serverless templates. And so I'm wondering if there's somehow some blend of like, can I build like the API and the database that I need over here, and then can I build a separate stack? But it's like, man, should I be separating stacks like that? That some people tell you yes and some no, and then some say you get so big that you end up splitting them up into different stacks anyhow, so it doesn't even matter. So then I'm like, wow, what does it matter? What's the end goal here? Is it velocity? Is it keeping it? I don't know. I don't know either. So I'm not sure.
Okay. So how would you suggest somebody should learn about it?
With Amplify, oh man, there's more content than ever. I'll tell you that much, than there's ever been.
That's the problem.
Yeah, now you don't know what to wade through. Yeah, back then it was I only had what I had, right? You know, I could find all the Nader's articles. The first, 6 or 7 would just pop up in Google. That's all there was. Yeah, that's tough. Well, first off, the biggest question you're going to ask yourself, depending on where you're at, who you are, and what you're building, is DynamoDB going to fit your needs? Because that's their out of the gate. That's their database integration. Now you can use RDS or any other things, but I see a lot of people get frustrated when they start to build with Amplify and they use DynamoDB and they realize they can't get something simple like counts. If you use like a Postgres database or any relational database, they keep track of those things. DynamoDB does not. They do not keep track of those things. They are really good for building large data sets that are scalable, that are efficient, they're like, flat. They are not good for, building an insane amount of joins or filtering a bunch of stuff. But what advice I'd give? It's so tough. Because now they have all these directives and everything else. All I would say is if you're building something on Amplify, go hang out in the Discord. If you're not familiar with, they have a Discord channel. That's been very helpful. I see a lot of people get a lot of answers. There's some rock stars in there who do answer questions. If you answer or ask thoughtful ones, especially, they really like to dive deep on the answer because they're like, ooh, good point. Let me see what I can do for you. Follow Nader's videos. He's got some amazing content for building things. I know Ali Spittle, she's like a senior AWS advocate now. She's a part of the community builder. She puts out a lot of content, but it's like, where do you even start? Because once you start to build with the Amplify, under the hood, it's like there's that magic. Like the same problem that I experienced with Ruby on Rails, the magic that happens, it made my head swim because I didn't actually know what was going on. And if you actually know what's going on when you start using Amplify under the hood, there's a lot they do for you, and it's for better, for worse, right? Because they create this infrastructure for you that's secure, that's tight, that you wouldn't know how to build on your own. But then once you hit something that's outside of the norm, it can be incredibly frustrating because then you don't know what to do because it did it all for you. And so when you're learning, maybe learn to go look at the resources that it generates for you too. So when you use Amplify, you're going to use the Amplify CLI to generate, say, Amplify add auth, right? Add authorization to your application and kind of sync it up. My suggestion would be to go look at the resources that it auto generates in CloudFormation. You might not get it all, but just go look at it. Just get familiar enough that you're like looking at CloudFormation templates. You don't have to get it all, but kind of starting to see the structure and how it works, because CloudFormation is like the core of everything. And whether you're using serverless or Terraform or SAM templates, it's all the same thing. It's all CloudFormation under the template, or under CloudFormation templates under the hood. They always come down to that. So if you could start to read CloudFormation templates, that's one. That's like learning what your infrastructure looks like, and then understanding some of the bases of Cognito, DynamoDB, and if you're using GraphQL, if you haven't familiarized yourself with that, AppSync, it's really hard to say. It's a big mountain to climb. Have a project in mind. Have something you want to build, and build it with Amplify. Yeah, that's all I could do. Yeah, have something you want to build, or maybe you want to build with a buddy. That would be cool if I had a friend I could build something with where we held each other accountable. We both wanted to build to be really nice. And blog about it, tweet about it, ask questions about it. And for the most part, like, I've had this guy who's a buddy. I've had a couple of people reach out to me on Twitter, just from me doing my stuff. And The one right now is building this thing called use shopping cart for Stripe. And so a lot of people just want to be able to drop a shopping cart component in their app for Stripe. And so he'd been building things, and he heard a lot of this. And so he's actually building this thing, right, with Amplify. Okay. And to be honest, he's still early on in his journey. He doesn't know a lot of what he's doing, but he's like figuring it out. And so when he hits a wall, he has a problem, he goes online and hey, on Twitter, blah, 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 this thing with Amplify. And I was like, ooh, I know something about Amplify. What you got there, bud? You know? And so I started helping him out. And so here he is, like, building this, if you look it up now, it's getting a lot of notoriety from Stripe itself, because he, built this free tool, NPM thing. But kind of under the hood, he's still like figuring it out, and he's got people on the internet helping him build it. And so like, it's not always going to be that exciting, but another guy reached out to me directly on Twitter, and almost a year later, he's doing some big exciting things, and I'm trying to help him out. So it's just like, don't be afraid to go on the internet and ask people questions, or maybe ping the AWS Amplify team. Be thoughtful about it. Always be thoughtful. When you ask questions, that's the other thing I can say. People who ask thoughtful questions generally get thoughtful responses. If you're up on the internet demanding things, you're probably not going to get very far. Just saying, hey, what's this? Kind of, hey, I tried this and this, but this is what I ended up with. Does anyone have any assistance? And yeah, blog or tweet your journey. People love it. People love to see a come up story especially on Twitter. Yeah.
That's a good point.
Yeah.
And Discord channel, as you said.
Oh, immense full. Yeah, you go in there and you have a little bit of time and patience. Plus, it's really cool in there too, because if you spend enough time in there asking questions, you run into other people, who ask questions a lot, and you kind of like make these connections. And then you're like, people were asking questions that, you're like, oh, I don't even know that I need that, but now I saw it. I'll look out for it later when it whacks me out of nowhere. Now I know to see it, because you're just kind of hanging out in there and reading and seeing what other people are asking and stuff. So yes, and for those of you who are going to look at the Amplify docs and be like, wow, this is cool, it covers the bases, but it doesn't tell me what to do. It's not going to tell you what to do. You need to go stitch together people's walkthroughs and tutorials to kind of get a better feel for it. That's what I'd recommend. Yeah, it's like their biggest complaint they've had for a while. And don't tell Michael Edelman, I see him on Twitter all the time. He does all their docs, and he's taking it up a big notch. He's really trying to, but the docs are really good for explaining what the things do, but they don't explain like in the context of how you can really use it. So don't be put off by that. Just go do other people's tutorials and walkthroughs. Okay. Yeah.
And how would you advise somebody who is just entering the industry or trying to make a lateral switch into the IT industry? What would be your advice?
Build things, have a portfolio, build real things, like not just like tutorial walkthroughs, right? Where you were able to just go step by step and like you don't actually wrap your head around the concepts. You need yourself to be enough in the deep end where you're like, you had to use even if you reverse engineered something, right? Even if you took somebody else's website and looked at it and said, I want to build this just how they did. Like the best thing you can do is have actual knowledge, because anyone can talk about like, here's what JavaScript does and blah, 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 blah. But really like at the end of the day, if you're building, front end applications, you need to know obviously JavaScript and CSS, but you also need to know like how to interact with an API and how state management works to some extent, right? Those core features that you need to make any app work. And so build things that are yours, that were interesting and or flashy, right? Build interesting and or flashy problems is all, is the best way to do it. And, interviews are hit or miss, so you never know what kind of interview you're going to get. I've had some really ridiculous ones, and then I've had another one that they literally printed out their website on paper. And they're like, oh, here are I can't remember how they was like, here are the pages. Can you tell me which endpoints they would be based on the list of what I've given you? I was like, oh yeah, oh, I got this, let's go. It was like one of the coolest interviews that was very early on. But yeah, just like, build something that's yours, not just somebody else's walkthrough, and you will get immense value out of that. do that once or twice, or build one big project that took you a long time, or build a bunch of little small ones. Go on Twitter and talk about it, and you will be surprised what can happen in a year's time.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
So you have given good points for people to start. You're an example of how somebody can switch into IT industry and make it big. It's a really, really good motivation for people.
I love to hear that.
Yeah. You have
Yes,
also
it does.
given good points. I'm sure our students will be able to gain a lot out of this.
I love to hear that. I want you all to go get it. Like, go get after it. There's so much potential, and I'll be honest, money out there. I worked for very little money through all of my 20s, and now seeing the access and the kind of money that you can go at out there is just like, it makes my jaw drop still sometimes. You know, I never, because I didn't care about money. Like, I really didn't. And it's silly to say, but like, and maybe that's a part of growing up in like middle class. We didn't have a lot, but we had more than what we needed. You know what I mean? It was like, we grew up rich. I grew up in middle class in a small town. And so I just didn't care. And then I got in 30 and I was like, oh shit, I got to retire one day and I got to have money and savings. Like, I had no money, still really have no money. I'm finally just starting to make money, but the potential to make money is ludicrous. You know, I served tables for minimum wage here in Chicago for a long time. And now I'm making 4 to 5 times what I ever made serving those tables. And that was a lot harder work, in my opinion, was running around serving tables and writing code. Like, that was way more work, you know, for a lot less money. And so the freedom, the money, and the interesting problems you get to solve, I hope is enough motivation for anyone out there. It certainly was for me once I got sunk my teeth into it. So it just, yeah.
It was great. Thanks a lot. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Amazing. I did. I had a great time talking to you. I hope someone gets some value out of this, and go get them out there.